Okay.
Hey, it's Alexander Lawrence, the Portable Infinite, and we're here with Steve Wynn, the Dream Syndicate, the Baseball Project. He's played in a bunch of bands. I think I'm one of the only people that have seen like the Dream Syndicate, the Baseball Project, the Minus Five, and Steve Wynn solo. Or is there more?
Wow. Bingo card is filled up. That's impressive.
Not that you played in all those bands, but you were in some of them. But
No,
um,
that's great.
yeah, I mean, it's a great time for the Dream Syndicate because they have a fairly new record. I mean, there's the '80s Dream Syndicate, and then there's four new records that came out in the last 10 years. Then there's a documentary, and the documentary covers the whole span of the group. And
Yes.
and then there's a book here. Let's see where. Let me get to it. Oh, okay. Oh, right. Okay. Well, maybe I can't get to it. Okay. Well, we'll get to it here. Okay. It's called "I Wouldn't Say If It Wasn't True: A Memoir of Life, Music, and the Dream Syndicate." And I'm guessing that's a lyric from a song.
Actually, I learned from a couple of my songs. It's strangely enough, it was from a song of mine called "Make It Up to You." Pretty obscure song of mine, but one I like, and I just kind of it felt natural for the story I was telling, so I just called it from there. But then I kind of figured, well, I'll put in a new song as well. So it's actually from the first song on my new solo album called Santa Monica. So it it got recycled.
So, I mean, there's been a few books. There's your book. I mean, the Paisley Underground. It hasn't really been. There's been some kind of collections of essays. Susanna Hoff wrote a novel. I think there's a
Mhm.
Bangles biography, but there's not really a lot of books about the Paisley Underground bands. And I mean, there's this book came out a few years ago, the John Doe.
Oh,
That's
yeah, yeah,
that's
it's a
kind
cool
of like,
book. Yeah.
and but it's more. I mean, it's more about the earlier '70s LA punk scene and
Hmm.
some of the bands that you guys played with, like maybe like the Salvation Army and the Minutemen and others. And I was just going to mention Red Cross also has a book coming out, which is like a band that started around the same time as Dream Syndicate.
Yeah, heard about that.
So yeah, I read that, and it's kind of like Please Kill Me, but it's just the two brothers interviewing, talking to each other basically, and kind of
Oh, okay. I like that. That sounds cool.
so it's coming out. So this book, so your book's coming out in August, and we're gonna talk a little bit about it. And yeah, what I thought was kind of interesting was I mean, like, to me as a music fan, I mean, just I was sort of into the LA punk thing, but it kind of petered out around 81, 82. Like if you and then a lot of people went hardcore, and then there's all these other interesting bands kind of popped up, and Dream Syndicate was one. Another was the Gun Club that were just
Mhm.
that came out of punk but didn't really weren't playing punk rock music and stuff. But you had an extra layer of interest because you like the Dream Syndicate just kind of came out of nowhere. It was like, but they didn't come out of nowhere because they came out of you guys all went to Davis College.
Well, not all of us. Kendra Smith and I, our bass player, she and I had been um, attending UC Davis from 1977 to 1980. We were both college DJs up there and had a band together up there. But then we came to LA, in the summer of 1980, and met, then Dave left Davis behind. I think sometimes people say, "Oh, Dreamston was a Davis band," or "I'm from Davis." Like, hey, look, man, I went to school there for 3 years, but I'm an LA kid, born and raised.
Yeah, I know you're from LA and you grew up near Pico and everything, but it seemed like
You're right about that.
I think Davis was. I mean, you kind of used it as kind of like a boot camp to kind of get your stuff together and then come back to
Yeah,
LA really strong and stuff. Yeah, and you had
yeah.
to kind of. I think going to Davis, even though and I don't consider yourself a Davis or a Sacramento band either, but I think it kind of gave you a little perspective on the LA scene and just go, okay, well, we're gonna do this and we're not gonna do that, and
Well,
we're
what you say is really true because you know, um, Yeah, Davis, well, Kendra and I and other friends up there. There's quite a scene up there. A lot of bands came out of that, like Thin White Rope and Game Theory and True West, and all kind of came out of not only Davis but specifically the KDVS college radio scene up there. And I think it was a great place to be. We were there from 1977 to 1980, me and Kendra. And it was a kind of a weird time to be up there because that's when punk rock was happening. That's when everything was going on. The Mask was happening in LA. And I see your shirt, CBGBs was rocking out in New York, and all that. And we were in Podunk, California, which ended up being a really good thing because we were able to kind of create our own scene, not get too, I guess, influenced or tainted by the snobbery of a big city scene. And we were kind of making it up as we went along. And that was handy. So I guess we went to Davis for a college education, which I never graduated, but the education we got was punk rock, DJ, working in record stores, learning how to be in a band. And that was, as it turns out, the best education I could have had. In the meantime, we came back to LA. Kendra and I came back at the same time and arrived kind of like what you're talking about after the entire, you know, initial boom of the LA punk rock scene had ended. There was, the Screamers and the Weirdos and the Bags and even X. And most of those bands didn't make it out of that period. X did, of course, but we missed all that. I never even went to the Mask. I never set foot in there because I was wrong place, wrong time, or maybe right place, right time. So by the time we came down to LA, we didn't feel part of the LA scene. We didn't even feel like we were upholding any kind of rule book. We just were making music we liked. And it was a weird time, that little blip of 1980, 1982 in LA, as you've talked about. At that time, it was strange because you kind of almost had to identify yourself as whatever punk rock was happening in the South Bay. There was great stuff, of course, down to Adolescence and DC3 and Black Flag, or whatever rockabilly scene was happening somewhere, or ska scenes. And we were like, we didn't feel like we were any kind of scene. We just played this kind of music we liked. The one thing I think we have in common with bands like Gun Club and our brethren and sistren in the Paisley Underground is that whatever we were into was fortified by punk rock. And that's why I say early in the day, Dream Syndicate, even though you can say Velvet Underground this or 60s that or Paisley this or Paisley that, we were really just kind of, in our minds, we were Black Flag. In our minds, we were just blowing the roof off every night. And if you listen to what we did around that time, it's really true.
Yeah. But when you were in Davis, you did go to the Mabuhay Gardens. You would come down to San Francisco and go to Mabuhay Gardens. You went to the Sex Pistols Winterland gig.
Yeah.
I don't know if you were going to Davis yet, or you were living in LA, or you were kind of on. It was right at the
I was
end.
in Davis. I just started going there. Yeah.
You had kind of a. Davis is close enough to San Francisco where you can go to shows and maybe go back or stay overnight and
Yeah.
stuff. So you have this band baseball project now, which I saw you get once in Portland, and but
Yeah.
you had a band called Sudden Death Overtime. You got the sports. I remember there was a band called Honus Wagner. So there was like a lot of baseball and sports names with bands. You were kind of like into it back then. So what was Sudden Death Overtime like?
Well, as I say in the book, the book starts with that band. That's the band I had when I was 13.
Oh,
And our entire career was um, a rehearsal, a gig in the school auditorium. But that was a big deal. We played to a full auditorium of junior high school kids at Emerson Junior High School, where I went to school down, in the west part of LA. And we just, we were nothing. We're just 13-year-old kids playing covers by the Who and the Stones and stuff like that. But we were doing it, for whatever reason. I don't remember even how this happened, but we got a gig playing in our school assembly. So that we were playing in front of, I don't know, 400 people for the first time I ever played a show in my life. That was a good start. And we were good. I wish I was recording of us somewhere, but I will maintain since there's look at that. That's my phone. Since there's nothing to improve the contrary, we were a very good band. We knew how to play those songs. I think of now, when people, if a bunch of 9-year-olds, as I was when I played in my first band, or a bunch of 12 or 13-year-olds form a band, people think, oh, they're probably going to be, amateurs or whatever. But now we learn the songs, we learn how to play Pinball Wizard and Jumpin' Jack Flash and stuff like that. I shouldn't say that's not that shocking a thing
Mhm.
now because there's so many of those School of Rock things everywhere. So now you
Yeah.
got lots of kids like having chops at 12 that I don't have now.
Well, I was born in '64, and I had an older brother, and my parents were both born
Mhm.
in the early '30s. I mean, you grew up around the area of Pico, La Cienega. I mean, there was a kind of a concept of the latchkey kid. Did you kind of
Mhm.
like, and there was a lot of freedom. Like parents kind of let you kind of roam where, I'm
Mhm.
in some, well, not so much when I was in San Francisco because I was really young, but when I was living in Orange County, I used to take the buses like all over the place, and my parents didn't even know about I would just, if I felt like it, I would just go over to Disneyland and go on some rides and like,
Yeah.
hey mom, how was your day? Because my parents were at work. Do you identify with being a latchkey kid and like kind of like a lot of freedom as an adolescent?
You grew up behind the orange curtain. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
That's a
yeah, yeah.
whole different reality. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I am, I guess that was a thing. I mean, it's funny in the process of writing the book, and even in recent days now, the books, the copies are out there. Of course, I sent a copy to my mother, and she's been reading it, and she said, I can't believe the things I let you do back then. I let you ride a bike around LA when you were 7 or 8 years old. I let you go down to record stores, go to baseball games with strangers when you're 14. I said, look, you did nothing wrong. That's how things were back then. Things are different now. Parenting is just kind of a little more hands-on. For I don't have kids, so I can't begin to criticize or not criticize what people what people do with their kids. You do whatever's right. But back then, I had a lot of freedom, and I was an only child, so I kind of not only had freedom from my mom, and eventually my stepdad, but I had freedom from having siblings. So I was on my own, just doing my thing, and I am so grateful for that. I don't think my life would have been anything resembling what it is now had I not had the freedom or if I'd had siblings. I and the relationship I forged rather than being driven by rules or restrictions or driven by having to get along with siblings, the relationship I forged as a kid was with music. It really was. That was my best friend. If I heard a song on the radio or saved up and got a new record, that was my best friend in the world. That was everything to me, and that made me pretty obsessive about music. It wasn't somewhere in the midst of playing little league or somewhere in the midst of trying to get good grades, what I think I did try to do, but it was number one with no number two in sight.
I think before there was kind of Roddy Bingenheimer and K Rock and KMT. I mean, there was a lot of people in Southern California who used to listen to KHJ with Top 40 radio, and
Hmm.
I mean in the '60s and '70s. I mean that was a really good time because I mean there was a lot of I mean there was a lot of good like singer songwriter stuff.
Yeah.
So that was you were kind of immersed in the KHJ culture before the FM radio thing took over.
Well, both. I think I kind of, in a way, had my timeline with music is a pretty fortunate one. I was a preteen, just tiny kid in the days, like you say, of KHJ, which was just really inspiring pop radio because it was top 40, but top 40 could mean everything from the Stones and Cream and to Motown to frickin' Frank Sinatra. It all was blended together. And I kind of came of the age of more curiosity in the era of freeform FM rock, a station called KPPC in Pasadena. Started when I was about 9 or 10. So all of a sudden, I've gone from having a good education in a classic era of pop hits to a extended education in a great era of really wacko, FM no rules DJs. And then my matriculation finally was punk rock. It's like at 17, what a better age to discover a really liberating form of music than when you're leaving the house and growing up and on your own. So, I'm sure had I been born in 1997, I'd have a different kind of um, musical connection to things, and we would probably be just as interesting and valid. Maybe yes, maybe no. But I feel fortunate that I grew up when I did. It made my relationship to music a pretty, you know, good one in my book.
In the 70s, I mean, there was kind of expansion of Tower Records and Warehouse Records and Licorice Pizza. But before that, I
Yeah,
mean, most
licorice pizza.
people most people bought records like right next where you bought your like washer and dryer. There'd be like a record selection right next to the washer and dryer. Like and you kind of talk about buying Creedence Clearwater Revival at May Company, and I used to buy a lot of records in the 70s um, at Kmart and Two Guys and a lot of these places that were just like the those kind of places because the record stores. I mean, the Tower was as the 70s went along was way more. There was one everywhere, you know, like Starbucks kind of thing, you know. But maybe in the 60s and the early 70s there was, you know, there wasn't nobody, not everybody lived by a Tower Records or something. Can you remember going to department stores and buying a lot of records there, or 99 like cutout records?
Yeah, all that kind of thing. Of course, cutouts weren't so much of a thing because they were already cheap. I mean, I think cutouts started a little later for me, but yeah, I mean, I they were good stores. I mean, one great store when I was growing up that I got to experience was a store called Wallach's Music City, which you probably know, of course. And it was there's one in the valley, but there was the main flagship one was Sunset and Vine, right next to where Amoeba ended up. They aren't there anymore, but where Amoeba was by the Cinerama Dome, and that was a great store because it unlike we were talking about like sort of the May Company, the Kmart type stores, this was a dedicated music shop, but they had, well, a great selection. They had actually sold guitars and amps, which was, whoa, that was pretty wild to go and look at that stuff. And also they had facing Sunset Boulevard, right, right there on the sidewalk. They had these little listening rooms that you could sit in. And remember, it was 10 cents an hour. And for 10 cents an hour, you could sit in your own little booth with your turntable and your headphones and bring in any stack of records from what they sold. So, a dime, you could be sitting there with a stack of whatever and stare at people walking down the street. Oh, that was to me that was a great day when I got a ride up to Wallach's and got to do that kind of thing. And of course, then I grew up, I mean, I'm not sure how things were in Orange County. I guess you had a Tower Records eventually, but in Westwood Village, near where I grew up, if I rode my bike 4 miles or whatever to get there, I'd be able to have my run of places, the great stores that were there as well. So it was as you know, being LA, LA was, it really was the center of the music world back then. It's not now. Now the center of the music world is the internet. It's wherever you find yourself. But back then, everybody had to play LA. Everybody had to sell the records in LA. And if you lived in LA, you had your pick of your run of the table, your pick of everything.
Yeah, I think like yeah, the 60s. I mean, there was still like the Brill building and a lot of the music industry event. You know, Dylan went from Woodstock and then he moved to Malibu, and there was kind of there was and
Nice weather.
there was a lot of people like kind of gravitating towards LA like in the 60s and 70s, and it kind of ended up there, like you say. So you know, my memory, I mean, I started going to shows maybe about 79, or maybe, you know, unless you count Shana Na or something, but or
Which I don't usually.
so like my memory of meeting like a lot of the original punk bands, like, you know, the guys from the Germs or X or something, was
Mhm.
they weren't really very friendly. I mean, especially because I was like about 15 or 16, and you know, used to go to the Starwood, and
Oh
but
wow.
you went to University High, and a lot like Darby Crash and Pat Smear, you went there at the same time as a lot of those guys, right?
Yeah.
What were those guys like back then going to high school with them? Because I remember that crowd. I mean, I'm friends with Don Bowles now, and some of these people, they're
Oh, say hi to him for me.
but but back in the day, they were just, I mean, just maybe just because I was like 5 or 10 years younger than them, they seemed real intimidating and like sort of scary looking. And but you know, I remember, yeah, because I was thinking about this, and I remember meeting Red Cross in the early 80s, and I just remember them being a lot more friendly. and then some of the mask scene and stuff. But you went to school with these guys at University High School, the Go-Go's maybe, and
Not Go-Go's, but yeah, Darby when he was Jan Paul Beam and Pat Smear when he was I forgot was it
Ruth
Pat?
Ruth and Smear.
Yes, that's it. Thank you very much. I've got my yearbook close to me. I can find the picture. But yeah, I didn't. Well, they were in a little there was a subset at University High School called IPS. I think it was Independent Project Studies, and this is so 70s. But it was a wing of the school where they put kind of the misfit kids, the ones who were smart but also couldn't be controlled, and they would be able to go into this section of school and do whatever the hell they want all day. They could study what they wanted, how they wanted to, all bets were off. Man, that wouldn't happen now. But back then, there was so much freedom in the school. And both Darby and Pat were part of that school, that section. So I would go over there. I was actually at the time a sports writer. I was writing for the school paper, and we would. This is so crazy to think of. We would deliver the school paper. What's wacko? But we, one of our I guess part of the way to teach us how to be grown ups in some way. I don't know, or girl, I don't know why. But we would bring the little high school paper to different classrooms, and I was generally the one who brought the paper to IPS. So I'd see these freakazoids. Another was Will Amato, who may not be as well known, but he's um, great cartoonist, and he was a cartoonist for the paper at the time, and did eventually a record cover for the Dream Syndicate, and really, really, talented guy. And he was part of that as well. But I'd go into that section. I'd see Will and Darby and Pat, and other previous names, of course, just sitting on beanbag chairs and lounging around. I said, this is a different way of going to school. But I got to know Darby a little better because he eventually became best friends with my high school girlfriend, Michelle Bear, and she's actually with him in Decline of the Western Civilization. She's in the scene with him, and so I kind of got to hang out. But I was, despite being a lover of punk rock and obsessive collector and learning all the songs and playing music that was influenced by punk rock. I wasn't socially a punk rocker. You know, I didn't have I didn't have the fashion sense, the hair, the attitude. Like you say, the next generation learned what we learned from punk rock, but we weren't, we ditched that specific attitude. Granted, we all had our own issues of whether it was drugs or alcohol or weird behavior or not following other kinds of rules that were there were. But punk rock by the time like for example, you say well, Red Cross were so young, my God, but all the bands who came and played, or be it REM or ourselves, we were music fans first, and less of the fashion sense. We made our own fashion sense, I guess.
Yeah, that kind of leads to my next question. It seems like I mean, you got to work at a radio station. I kind of did a little bit of radio. I mean, very minor, but you did a college radio station, and you worked at record stores. And I
Yeah.
think especially back then, it seems like that's a really great music education because you are exposed to a lot of different music and a lot of different and you get I mean, most people back then just kind of like you kind of had your record collection and your best friend's record collection, and maybe you traded back and forth. But college radio and record stores, you just seem like a lot of music, and you see what people are into. And I just think it's
Yeah.
especially I mean, living in New York it's a very social town. You just walk out the door and you run into people on the street, or same thing with San Francisco. But LA, I think it's really important to have those kind of social experiences, and you only get those if you like work at somewhere like Amoeba or
Mm.
maybe a radio station where you, you get like an influx of like different people all the time and stuff. So I just wanted you to talk about the like the music education you got even before the band really happened, the Dream Syndicate. Because of your experiences with college radio and the record stores and all that.
Well, it was a great education. I mean, I was like you say, like I said earlier, the idea that your musical knowledge would be limited to your friend's record collection, your brother's record collection. I mean, I did work in this great station. KDVS was and is a fantastic station with a really strong signal and wide reach, and everybody would court our station. All the labels, would court our station with free records and concert tickets and stuff like that. We were big shots at 17 and 18 years old, and we had an incredible library there. And much like I was talking earlier about this record store where you could sit in a listening room and stare at Sunset Boulevard, we had a similar thing at the station where there was a listening room. And I mean, I had a pretty good record collection, I thought, but this station had everything. Oh my God, and whatever we didn't have, we could get. And so I would spend so much time in that little listening room listening to it was my education. It was I knew the classic rock touchstones. I was already somewhat sophisticated in my taste, but man, I was in there learning about Albert Eiler and John Coltrane and Miles Davis and krautrock and anything I could get my hands on. I wanted to know not just the music I love, but where it came from and where that music came from and how it all filtered down. And by the time I kind of got, whatever I learned from the working and being a DJ and then added to it with what I learned at working at a record store like Rhino Records in Westwood, where I ended up working for a couple of years. You know, it's the same way. It makes me think right now as I'm talking about this. I saw an interview with Paul McCartney a couple of days ago, and he was saying, "Well, we were good because we played so much and so many shows in Germany and Liverpool, and we put in." He said, "We put in the 10,000 hours, the famous thing." Well, we did too, but the 10,000 hours and the work we put in wasn't in gigging, which would have been fine and all that. It was in studying music. And I put in those 10,000 hours, on the radio, in the listening room, in the record stores, in grabbing any fans I could find. And by the time the Dream Syndicate came about, we were good because I think we had some talent, or we were good because we had a good chemistry, but we were also good because we just knew shit. We just knew stuff. And we on it, and that's what gave us the cockiness we had at first, because we knew what, for, of course, and this is all subjective, but in our mind, for our taste, we knew what was good and what wasn't good. And we knew how to tell the difference, and we knew how to make the music that we thought was good. And we would not allow any room for anything we thought didn't pass that test. I know I've become, I'm not bandmates with Peter Buck, and we spent a lot of time together, and we're very good friends. And he was doing the same thing with REM at the time. He had such snobbish attitudes about good music and bad music over there in Georgia. And he instilled that upon his bandmates too. No, we don't do it like that. We don't play that kind of music. We play this kind of music. And it's really, that came from just being a music obsessive, from that being your life. Now, later on, we got a little confused as we got swept into a lot of other things in our lives and the machinery of music business, sadly, for a couple of years. But initially, man, our greatest attribute wasn't that we could shred or that we could, write a rock opera. It was that we had a bullshit detector that was, a mile long.
Yeah. Also, I mean, you kind of got absorbed all this knowledge, and then you kind of went out and kind of like practiced. Yeah, like in the summer of '81, you got on a Greyhound and went to the East Coast, and you
Yeah.
you looked out like Alex Chilton, and you kind of like sought him out and went to New York.
Hmm.
What inspired you to go to those places? Because it seems like a little. I mean, Alex Chilton, I think in '80 was like almost like kind of a invisible guy. Nobody was really talking about him. He was kind of
Nobody.
so what
Who knew?
inspired you to
Yeah.
go out there and look up those people?
I mean, the famous thing they say about the Velvet Underground is they sold what 5,000 records, and everybody who had them formed a band. Well, the same is true of Alex Chilton and Big Star, except for the numbers are smaller. I mean, probably 100 people in the country knew about Big Star, and they all, you know, became REM and the DBs and the Replacements and the Dream Syndicate. That I was just at that moment in my life, 19, 20 years old. This is, was put it in time frame, 1979 to 1980. There were a few bands I loved more than any other, and one of them was Big Star, and not just Big Star, but the third album. I just thought Big Star Third was speaking to me. It was that kind of thing that you have at that age where I felt like that record was made for me. He's he's on my brainwave. He's singing to me, man. He's feeling my life. How did he do that? That way you feel when you're young and a record really hits you so directly. And I was so moved by it. I just figured, I'm 20 years old. I've got a free summer. Greyhound buses are pretty cheap. I'm just gonna go. I'm just gonna go to Memphis and find him. And I did. And that's crazy. And I think of that now, like what a thing to do. Go 2,000 miles on a Greyhound bus, show up at a random address you saw on the back of a record cover, and track down a guy. And luckily, or, luckily or whatever, he was receptive to this crazy kid. And he was probably about 30 to my 20, I think, if I do the math right. And I don't know, he was a very low point of his career. I would say probably as low as he ever got as far as popularity, as far as maybe lifestyle. Um, but he was, it wasn't box tops anymore. It wasn't the potential that didn't come through with Big Star. It wasn't his revival in the '80s. He was unknown, and somehow decided this kid who was going to buy him beer and cigarettes. Oh, maybe that's the reason. But he was willing to keep me around for a little while.
So we get to 82 finally. We get this record,
Oh, there it is.
Days of Wine and Roses.
Yeah,
Here's what you guys look like back then.
I look the same now, I think.
And yeah, I saw you guys play. I mean, how I heard about you, because I like the Psychedelic Furs, and they played at the Santa Monica
Mm.
Civic and around the same time this record came out. They got a little shine there. And you guys kind of came on, and I just remember like this wall of feedback. I mean, I later saw like My Bloody Valentine there, but like feedback wasn't like on the card for me, like back then. I just remember
Mm.
Carl like just about a minute of feedback, and then you kind of went into a song. You're just kind of going into a song like, oh, he's I'm cool with all this feedback. I'm just going to be playing my little song here. And I'm going, wow, these guys are, it's like doing something different. It's like, Jesus, we hadn't seen Jesus and Mary Chain. We hadn't seen My Bloody Valentine, but Dream Syndicate was kind of doing something similar, like in 82. And
Earlier, of course. Yeah.
yeah, and even before. And it was like, I just remember that show. And yeah, I think you told me one time that that was one of the earliest shows, the first 10 shows you played or something. Or
Yeah,
Dream Syndicate.
we did a little tour of the psychedelic furs, about 4 cities. We'd already at that point been together for almost a year, but it was still pretty early. It was the first time we played for that many people, that's for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, it was like
And
I think it was
and
sold out.
someone asked me the other day, they were saying, well, what was it like touring with U2, for example, who we toured with a few months after that show? And I don't, at that point in our lives, when we opened for the Furs or for U2, or even very early on for Wall of Voodoo, for example, who are kind of doing well, there was never a feeling of, well, we'd better try to win this audience over, or we better try to, give it our A game, or think of everything we can gain from if we play the show right. We would just go out and try to make the audience hate us in a way, because we felt like, look, if we go out there and make them hate us, and 10% or 5% or 0.01% of the people there come to us on our terms, then we have somebody who belongs in our club. We had that kind of snottiness. And that snottiness really served us well for about a year, and really did not serve us well in the year after. But for a little while, that kind of arrogance was what made us good, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of stories. There's a lot of bands you toured with. Yeah, I just remember those early days. I mean, the Dream Kit Syndicate. I mean, is still doing like. I mean, he did 4 records in the early days. There's 4 newer ones. I mean, it's all really good. There's a documentary. I mean, if people want to check out the Dream Syndicate, they should probably go to. You have a website, thedreamsyndicate.com. That they can find the information about the band. And this book, it's coming out in August 20th or around that.
August 30th, along with a new
30th.
solo record I've coming out. So yeah, it's gonna be a big day.
So are you going to do some touring on around this book, or what can we look forward to when this book comes out like next month?
I'm going to be touring the UK in September and then the US in October, and then kind of a lot of touring between February and May next year, all for the book. Doing shows, some of them solo, some with a small group, but kind of I'm trying to get something unlike what I've done before. Will be a little bit of reading, not to a point where it's going to bore the pants off people, but a little bit of the book, some storytelling, and then the song choices I'm making are going to be songs that fit the narrative of the book. So it'll be a lot of songs from early Dream Syndicate and a lot of covers that inspired those songs and maybe the work into the overall story. So it would be really focused on the timeline of the book.
So the timeline of the book, I mean, it kind of talks about your childhood, the growing up in LA and going to Davis, UCLA, the band, Dream Syndicate, the breakup at the end of the 80s,
Yeah.
kind of like, and then some of the other bands. And so I mean, people should definitely buy this book and check it out, and check out the documentary, and like see these guys on tour, because this is a I mean, Dream Syndicate are definitely like an important. There's not like a bum record or anything, like there's not like oh they went heavy metal like on this record or anything. That stuff. It's like it's like,
We made good records. I think I'm proud
yeah,
of.
yeah,
And the thing is, and we reunited about 10 years ago and have made four records in the last, I don't know, handful of years that I think are, and every band says this, but I will say with conviction that stand up to everything we did back then and then some. I think we've, to be honest, my favorite Dream Syndicate album is the one we put out um, 4 years ago called "The Universe Inside," and that's that. When I think of records we have to live up to, it's not Days of Wine and Roses, it's that one. So that we're still doing our thing.
okay, well, definitely check them out on tour this fall. Buy the book again. Thanks for talking to me, and we've been going on for a while. It's been very enlightening today, and thanks again. And we'll see you on tour.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I've been eyeing your black and white Strat back there, and it looks really
No,
good. So,
it's a copy.
copy